Welcome to the fourth installation of MarshWatch. This is the third ID session that we're going to be doing, and I am very excited about this one because there's a couple of cool grebes in here. And before we get started, I'd just like to say that I'm coming at you today from Saskatoon. We're located on Treaty 6 territory, which encompasses the traditional lands of the Cree, Dakota, Nakota, Saulteaux, and Stoney First Nations, as well as the homeland of the Métis. In case you're joining for the very first time, I'm Leanne Lattremoy and I love wetlands. I also happen to work for an organization called Birds Canada. We're a national not-profit charitable organization, and our mission is to drive action to increase the understanding, appreciation, and conservation of birds in Canada. And as you can see from my little montage of photos here, I've been kind of into wetlands for a while. I started my career working, in wetlands in southern Ontario as some of my first jobs, and I really do adore them, and that's what brought me out to the prairies, and the prairies have some fantastic wetlands. So if you're not from the prairies, highly recommend you come out and visit and check out all of our super wonderful wetlands. On the agenda for tonight, we've got some bird and amphibian ID that's going to be recorded, and the videos are posted up online. And after that, we're going to have some quizzes and some time for discussions. And don't worry, I won't be posting um, or any recordings of that. Okay, on the docket for this evening, we've got two small ducks. We've got the blue-winged teal and the green-winged teal. We've also got two grebes, the horned and the eared grebe, as well as a shorebird, the Wilson snipe, and the black tern. We also have, it's actually three frogs. We've got the spring peeper and two very closely related tree frogs. So should be an interesting evening here. Let's start off with bird number one, the blue-winged teal. This is a small dabbling duck. So if you recall from our other webinars, dabbling ducks feed at the water's surface. They're, pretty capable of walking around on land. They actually nest farther up in the upland, and they can fly off from a standstill. They also don't really dive underwater for their food. Sure, they can go a little bit under, especially if they're trying to get a good bath going, but generally speaking, they're floating on the water and eating at the water's surface. So the male blue-winged teal, the drake, is actually quite a gorgeous little bird. He's got this bluish, almost purple like head, but very kind of dark blue, with this great big crescent patch between the eye and the bill. It's something that you can't miss. You're not going to mistake. It is very, very large. And if we, as we've talked about before, especially when you're looking at waterfowl and if they're any sort of distance away, the features that are white on the duck are really going to stand out at a great distance. So that great big white patch right there on the face is kind of your dead giveaway. Huge crescent, takes up, a large portion of the feathers between the eye and the bill. Otherwise, kind of got a brown, speckly little body, and the rear end is black with a little bit of white on it. In flight, you can see why it's called the blue-winged teal. Both the hen and the drake have this powdery blue patch on their kind of upper wing shoulder area. The speculum, which is the flight feathers down here, are kind of greenish with a little bit of dark, and they're iridescent. So a really gorgeous bird in flight as well as sitting on the water. But it is quite a tiny little duck, and if you get the chance to see them on a pond near something like a much larger duck like a mallard or a northern shoveler, it's really apparent how small the blue-winged teal is. The hen, of course, is going to be drab and mottled brown, but don't worry, I'll give you some clues. Um, the best clue here is you're going to start off with a little bit of size here. Oftentimes, these birds are on a wetland with others. So the small size is going to point you towards teal, and all of the green-winged teal and the blue-winged teal, the hens have this nice dark bill. And what's going to set the blue-winged teal apart from the green wing is the female's got a much paler looking face. So she has these whitish eye arcs above and below the eye, a little bit bisected by a bit of a dark eye line here, and a whitish base to the bill. It's not, stark, but it's enough to look like she's got a pale head. And we'll compare it with the green-winged teal later, and you'll see what I mean by pale. But otherwise, especially when she's floating around on the water, you don't always see this powdery blue patch sticking out. But if you happen to do, that's going to be a great clue as well that you've got, a blue-winged teal hen bouncing around. She doesn't have the shiny green feathers on the speculum. They're much more dark on the hen. These guys are opportunistic dabblers. They're going to be eating everything from aquatic invertebrates to algae, vegetation, and they'll feast on agricultural grains because they are able to get up and walk in the upland. They can snack on some of that waste grain. And their little guys are pretty adorable. But you can see the hen here. You've still got those kind of whitish eye arcs and that pale base to the bill. The bill itself is dark both on the drakes and the hens, but otherwise small teal, whitish markings on the face. They're not super bright, but they are much paler than our green wing hen coming up here. And they call a little bit. It's not something that I would say like, oh, you've really got to remember this sound, but here is the blue wing teal call, just mostly for your interest. So sorry to everyone who thought they had some hearing loss. It's not even the loudest sound too, so I could see how you might get there. So apologies for that, but sweet, soft little pips, it's very kind of squeaky, soft little pipping noises. It is one of those things that, I'm not going to say you really need to learn the call of the blue-winged teal. It's going to help you out. It's probably not, but it's also kind of nice to know every now and then. Okay, on to our green winged teal. So the green winged teal is our smallest dabbling duck. It's kind of more squat and more compact than the blue winged teal. It's got a smaller head and bill, and the drake is actually quite ornate and beautiful looking. There's this chestnut head with this kind of dramatic, dark iridescent green kind of eye stripe eyeshadow thing going on. It's really quite striking. That white bit here, we've got this nice white spur on the side of the flanks near the front of the bird. And again, like all of those little white features, if you see this at a distance and you see that little white spur on an otherwise, it's going to look kind of dark if it's far away and the lighting's not great. You see that little white spur, you know for sure that you're going to have a green-winged teal. There is a Eurasian race that occasionally we'll get the odd bird here from over in Europe, and they don't have that little white spur, but by and large, almost all of the green winged teals you'll see, and every single one that I've seen has been the American green winged teal, and it's going to have that nice little white spur. Otherwise, the sides are kind of flanked with these variegated black and white, giving it a gray appearance. This kind of pretty little spotted breast is also really nice, but that chestnut head, the dramatic eye stripe, and especially that little white spur here is really going to help point you in the direction of the green-winged teal. On the drakes, there's this kind of white triangular patch on the rump that is edged in black, and that's going to actually come in handy when we're looking at the females here in a sec. The speculum, it's much less exciting than the blue-winged teal. We don't have that powdery blue patch, but we do have some iridescent green and black feathers, and edged in a little bit of a whitish buffy over and above that speculum patch. Now, on to the hen. So remember we were talking about that blue-winged teal, how she's got an overall lighter colored face? That's because the green-winged teal, that's going to be the other small brown duck that you're going to be seeing, she has a much darker face overall. And this is going to take practice to be able to get to see. But I have a trick for you. And it took me, I don't know, probably 12 or 13 years before I, came across this. But the hen conveniently has this kind of cream whitish patch on the rump here, right on the side. She's going to be otherwise all mottled brown, and there's going to be this little kind of whitish patch right by the rump. It's often visible, and there isn't another hen that's going to be having that whitish stripe. Don't ask me how it took me so long to kind of hone in on that, but I'm telling you, so you don't have to wait as long. So keep in mind, if you see a small brown duck, check the rear end and see if you can't see a little whitish stripe. And then take a look at the face, and she really does have a much darker face overall. There isn't any sort of white eye arcs. She's got a bit of a darker crown. There's a bit of a darker eye line through it. She's got a nice little dark bill, and it really doesn't have that kind of pale feathering around the bill and around the eye that the blue-winged teal hen has. If she flashes her wing at you, that can be a little bit helpful. But it's more helpful if the blue-winged teal does and you see that powdery blue patch. But that little cream patch right at the end here is, going to be really, really helpful for you. It's also an opportunistic dabbler, so they're going to be eating sedges, grasses, aquatic vegetation, insects, larvae, crustaceans, and mollusks. Now, the peeping on the green-winged teal is quite a bit louder and less kind of soft and delicate, so we'll play that here now for you. It almost sounds like a spring peeper if you are already familiar with that. But you can see again here, this hen's got this nice white patch right here in the rump. And again, that overall, that kind of darkish looking face. Also convenient, especially early in the breeding season, they're often paired up. So it can be helpful to, focus on the drakes first and get to those and, see what the hens that are swimming around them look like in association. I don't ever tell people to, yes, start by trying to identify female ducks because it's hard and it takes, a fair bit of practice and just getting used to seeing these birds. So, you know, start off with the drakes and then, see who they're hanging out with. And usually it's the same species. The odd time they have these little weird romantic trysts. Okay, let's compare those two hens side by side, the blue-winged teal hen on top and the green-winged teal hen on the bottom. And you'll just note the overall kind of darkness of the face of the green-winged teal as opposed to the paler look to the face that the blue-winged teal has because she's got those pale eye arcs and the feathering at the base of the bill is more whitish. It's not, pure white or anything, but it's definitely not dark looking. You know, both of these are going to be small little teeny tiny hens, and they're both going to have nice dark bills. And don't worry, we're going to be doing a big review session at the end and we'll do lots more comparison of our, brown lady ducks. But um, here's just these two itty bitty little hens that you're likely to encounter. And again, take a look at that rump patch. If you see that kind of streak of this whitish or this kind of pale straw color on the rear end, you've got yourself a green-winged teal. So those are the teal hens compared. Moving on to the grebes, if you recall from last week, grebes are expert divers. They have their legs super far back on their bodies, and they're just really, built for an aquatic life. They can fly. I almost never see grebes flying. They're definitely, a bird that just seems to appear on water bodies. So the horned grebe is a relatively small grebe. It's got a nice short pointed little dark bill and a relatively flat topped head. It's got this gorgeous red eye, but that can be tough to see at a distance. Both sexes are pretty similar looking. Sometimes in a pair, you can tell that the male is more brightly colored and a little bit larger, but in my experience, sometimes it's been really hard to tell and they look nearly identical to one another. So, just know that sometimes you can tell the difference between the sexes, but oftentimes, you just can't. They look similar enough. So they're called horned grebes because they have this lovely yellow golden horn that kind of extends as a big eyebrow patch. And they're able to move a lot of their head feathers. And so those kind of big fluffy feathers that grow off the side of the bird's face, they can move those out, and we'll see those in the next slide here, but it makes them have kind of a blocky looking head. Otherwise, kind of a plain dark back and rusty red kind of neck and flanks. You'll often find these guys on small ponds in pairs. They don't tend to go for the bigger water bodies. There's been some research to show that they don't get along terribly well with pie-billed grebes, and the pie-billed grebes are kind of aggressive towards them. So the horned grebes tend to, find themselves on small little pothole wetlands that, that we don't really have the pie-billed grebe that we were talking about last time on. So horned grebes in pairs on these small little ponds. We also talked about last week that grebes do all kinds of elaborate courtship rituals and dances, and I was actually able to find some photos of horned grebes doing some of those dances. So here's a few examples of the penguin dance where they've really got those head feathers, quite fanned out, and they're up out of the water, showcasing those white bellies that you almost never see on them. And below we've got a little bit of a weed ceremony going where they'll both go and they'll find some vegetation and they'll show it off to their mate saying, "Hey, look at me. I can, I'm totally capable of building the best nest you've ever seen. Look at all of these plants that I've gathered." They're very cute, especially when they're in the breeding season and they're trying to impress one another. It is rather adorable. They're a diver and they feast primarily on aquatic insects, larvae, fish, and crustaceans. Fish and crustaceans more so in the winter, and then the small ponds, often the aquatic insects, because a lot of the ponds out here on the prairies freeze right to the bottom, and so a lot of the ones that these grebes would be on, they don't support fish. If the fish do get in, they usually don't make the winter. And this is a grebe that, vocalizes really, really early in the season, but you don't hear it so much later. This is a grebe that I've heard, very seldomly myself. You need to get out there really early in the spring to hear this. So it kind of has a raspy, winning, braying sound. So I'm just seeing a note in the comments. Do they eat the weeds? No, they're just grabbing underwater, and it's a display to show their partner that, hey, look at me, I can build the best nest, because grebes build up their nests from below the water, kind of like a little mini volcano. And I guess it's impressive if they can go around and, gather all of the best nesting material, and it just, I guess, kind of shows their devotion in the pair. You'll see that in a few species that will, part of their ceremonies is kind of triumphantly, collecting sticks or twigs to present to their mate. I think it is rather adorable. But really, they don't eat vegetation at all. They really focus on aquatic insects, larvae, fish, and crustaceans. So that is the horned grebe. Another small-ish grebe that we have here is the eared grebe. And eared grebes are really cute. They've got this short little pointed bill, and overall, their head kind of has a triangular shape to it. And this is really helpful for identifying these little guys at a distance, because as the bird gets farther away, that triangular shape is really kind of what stands out. It's a fairly dark grebe. It also has those like those golden wispy plumes behind the eye. They're far more wispy and, you know, I guess wispy is just the best word for it, than say the horned grebe, which has them more compressed and more in an organized little arc. The eared grebe definitely has this kind of shock of wispy yellow plumes behind its crazy looking red eye. It does have a black neck, as opposed to kind of that reddish neck that we had on the horned grebe, but oftentimes you're seeing them at a distance, and there isn't a ton of contrast between that deep, rich, rusty brown and the black coloration. So really you're going to be focusing especially on the shape here. And the habitat clue is also going to be useful. So eared grebes are very gregarious. They nest in colonies, so you'll often not see just one eared grebe or two eared grebes. Often you're going to be seeing a dozen, 20, 30. I have done a point count before where I was desperately trying to count them all. I had 52 on that one count, and it was just, it was amazing to see. So they hang out in kind of shallow wetlands with lots of, cattail vegetation sprung up through it, and they'll actually nest colonially with other species. So I've personally seen them in and amongst Franklin's gulls colonies, but I suspect they might have some black terns also nesting in some of their colonies in some places. So this is a grebe that habitat is going to play a bit of a role in helping you identify it, and as well as that kind of gregarious nature. The horned grebes, they're just going to be hanging out in pairs on their own. This is another diver. They're going to be also eating all of those aquatic insects and larvae, little small crustaceans, small fish, and mollusks. And in the bottom left here, here's just an example of this colony. I was helping some researchers who were after, finding Franklin's gull colonies to help mark these birds, and there was just eared grebes and Franklin's gull nests interspersed all together. It was really kind of incredible to see. There was a ton of gulls and a ton of grebes nesting there kind of colonially. So I guess there's, safety in numbers, and you can see in the top photo as well. They definitely, don't mind neighbors in their nesting environment. They also do little ceremonies, and we just see a little bit of an example here of those guys coming up on their back legs. And the call is kind of interesting. It kind of goes Weechik, and it might sound like holy shoot, if you if you want to imagine it that way. So I'll play that here. Oh, oops, there we go. So it's really kind of a hilarious little call. And you'll often get, because they hang out in these gregarious groups, you'll occasionally get, a fair number of eared grebes calling at the same time. Okay, let's take a look at this horned grebe versus eared grebe. And especially at a distance, kind of that pointy triangular head of the eared grebe is going to be really helpful at a distance compared to the horned grebe, which just generally has a bit more of a flat top look to it. It does peak a little bit at the back, but it's not as, triangular and pointy as the eared grebe. The horned grebe has that lovely solid yellow patch, whereas it's more wispy little plumes on the eared grebe. They can get wet and some of them can stick together, but it's much more disorganized and it's less of a great big yellow patch. And again, that kind of behavior clue. The horned grebe, small little wetlands found in pairs, the eared grebes, and they're almost always found in groups. And just kind of to illustrate that flat head versus the pointy head, just, you know, making a silhouette of those photos, really that pointy, quite triangular head, that steep forehead, is really stands out, eared grebes in the distance. That's usually what I clue in on, especially if they're a distance away. Say, they're on migration and they're on this water body for a short amount of time. It's like, oh, which grebe is that? And that really pointy triangular head is really what's gonna, set the two apart. Okay, now on to our shorebird for the evening. We've got the Wilson's snipe. This is also formerly known as the common snipe, which is a European species. It was split, but if you have an old field guide or you've been, hearing about birds for a long time or you've been birding for a long time, just know that it would have been called the common snipe at one point, but now it is known as the Wilson's snipe. This is a medium-sized shorebird with a rather long, straight bill. It's quite, remarkable just how long that bill is compared to the rest of the bird's body. And it's got this kind of large head on a short neck. It can extend its neck, but oftentimes when you see it, it kind of has a tendency to scrunch its neck down, and it looks like somebody's taken, like an ice cream scoop and plopped a little head on top of this roundish body. It's a very chunky looking bird. It's related to the woodcock, if you're familiar with that bird at all. It kind of has that, centrally located eyes. They're really good at seeing everything around them. Mottled brown overall. There's some stripes and streaks on the head, and the back is streaked with these lovely straw colors on the back. But more often than you're going to see this bird, you're definitely going to be hearing it. So we'll do that in a second here, but this is definitely one that you're more often likely to hear than see. These guys love shallow wetlands and these damp soil habitats. They'll nest kind of in those wet meadow zones. So, the ground is a little bit soggy for part of the year, and they'll just, make a little nest right on the ground in that kind of soggy dirt little area. The cool thing about the Wilson snipe is that one of, its most iconic, what we would consider, a call or a song, is actually made by feathers. So they do this winnowing flight display, and I can't believe that Nick got this shot, but here is a Wilson snipe, in the midst of doing its flight display, and it'll fly high up and it will dive down with its, tail feathers fanned out. You can see it's got these strange little feathers on the side here on both sides. Those actually make this winnowing noise that I'm going to play for you in a sec here. And so it's a structural sound. It's really fascinating to me when birds sometimes evolve those kinds of sounds. So let's hear the winnowing flight display. And if you've ever heard this in person, it's you can tell that the sound is moving around you. So the bird is taking these long, dives up and down in the sky, and it's really a sound that can kind of surround you if you've got, birds going in the middle of where you are. So here's that winnowing flight display. Oh no, I lost my mouse. So that is the flight display sound of the Wilson snipe, and I'm seeing some notes that I'm freezing, unfortunately. I don't think there's a ton that I can do about it. So if there's anything that you would like me to say again, just let me know. Is that sound from the wings? Ah, okay. So yes, that sound is from the tail feathers. So those are those two feathers that you're seeing here on the edge of the tail, and the bird flies up and you know dives down, and the wind moving across those tail feathers is what's making that kind of winnowing haunting ethereal noise. So it's really a physical mechanical sound as opposed to a vocalization. And these guys are active a fair bit, throughout the morning, but especially they'll also go at, various times of the night as well. So it's really this incredible, ethereal, strange sound. They also do vocalize, and their other commonly heard call kind of sounds like a squeaky wheel, and it's got a regular interval to it, and it kind of goes keck, 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 keck. I'll play that once more because it really does sound like a squeaky wheel. Oh no. So, as you might guess from that really long bill, the diet of the Wilson snipe involves a fair bit of, probing around in the kind of the mucky, muddy, wet areas. So they're after larval insects, they're after earthworms, crustaceans, and mollusks. And the tip of their bill is actually really sensitive. There's all of these little sensors called Herbst corpuscles that help them sense when something's moving against their bill. So they can, probe into that wetland soil, and they can sense if there's little things moving around, so they can snap them up and eat them up quick. So kind of an interesting bird, that Wilson's snipe. Okay, black tern next. So this is a small little elegant tern, and it's really quite unmistakable. It's I think it's incredibly gorgeous. It's got this shockingly black, matte looking body, head, neck, body, everything is black. And then it's got this, silvery gray wings and tail. So it's just, if you've ever seen them flying around, they're so beautiful. They really have this kind of buoyant, erratic flight, almost like a butterfly flying around the wetland. And these guys actually, forage a long way from their nesting colonies. They're a colonial species, and they can go upwards of 80 kilometers in search of food before they go back to their nest. So both the males and the females look the same. They've got this lovely black body and those silvery wings. They often, spend most of their time flying around low over wetlands, and when they see something, they will skim the water and pluck it up. So they'll fly low over wetlands and they're looking for insects, fish, snails. They'll often go after frogs and tadpoles if they can get at them, but they don't dive headfirst into the water like you see with some other grebe species. They really, fly low and kind of glean stuff that's kind of on the surface or right below the surface, but you'll often see them, really low, erratically flying over these wetlands. And it's just they're really a graceful, beautiful bird. They don't have the nicest sound. Terns aren't known for their kind of melodious voices. And to me, black terns sound like they've swallowed some dog's squeaky toy. So let's hear the harsh squawks of the black tern. So yeah, it really to me is reminiscent of, a dog just really going after a little squeaky toy. And so if you are out in the wetland and you hear that kind of squeaky toy call, take a look and you'll be able to see the black terns. They're really a very highly visible bird. And it's amazing because, they do fly such long distances as they're going around and foraging. You can have 0 black terns, you're there at a wetland, and all of a sudden, there's 5 or 6 of them just flying around and skimming around and taking a look at the wetland. And next thing you know, they're gone. You can't see them at all anymore. They've moved on. They're going to another wetland. So they're a really neat species to watch. I quite love them myself. Okay, on to our first frog of the evening. Hopefully this is one that is familiar to many of you folks who are tuning in from the east, but this is the spring peeper. This is a itty bitty tiny little frog, 2.5 centimeters, about an inch long, and it's got this really handy feature in that it's got this lovely X on its back. So you can see that in all of these photos here. It's not always the most perfect looking X. Maybe one of the legs can be truncated, but they definitely have that kind of, darker marking of an X on the back. They're quite variable as we're starting to see with all of our frogs. The body color, can vary between tans and browns and greens and grays, but they'll always have that kind of darker X on the back. You'll find these guys around wooded ponds and vegetation. And out here in the prairies, they kind of just make it onto the prairies. You'll find them in Manitoba. Some of our field crews for the Breeding Bird Atlas actually heard some up in the forest area. So if you see my mouse over here, they heard some up around this way, which is really neat. In part, some of those range maps in a lot of those areas is just because there isn't any surveys done and nothing's been detected yet. So there have been, the odd detection or two of spring peepers here in Saskatchewan, but in a prairie context, they're definitely something that you're more likely to run into in Manitoba, and especially back east. I know, growing up, the springtime was just crazy with the sound of spring peepers. And if you've ever heard it, it is very, very loud, and there's often this massive chorus of peepers going, and they have this really incredibly loud peep, peep, peep call that just kind of goes on and on. I've had friends take videos or, audio and send it to me wondering what that bird is. And it's like, it's not a bird, that's a frog. And everyone's amazed because it is so loud for such a teeny tiny little frog. So here is the peeping of the spring peepers. So it is quite the chorus. And I can see from the comments that, frogs are starting to get out and do their thing. Paul says, the spring peepers are peeping out where he is in New Brunswick, and they really are that early spring harbinger. As soon as water starts melting, some of the frogs start to defrost, and they just get right to advertising It's quite amazing. So in the next week or two here, depending on where you are, this is the time for hearing frogs really going at it for their spring chorus. So that is our itty bitty tiny spring peeper. Hopefully, if I get more people, in Saskatchewan and Manitoba listening out for them, that we can help with some of those range maps. Because it takes people reporting their findings, right? Otherwise, no one no one knows. And some of those range maps really are, they're based on some data, but some of them it's based on not a ton of data. So that's why it's always really awesome to report your sightings. Okay, next we have tree frogs, and we have two species of tree frogs. We've got the gray tree frog and Copes's gray tree frog. And these are two exceptionally closely related species. They're so close, in fact, that they're indistinguishable by looking at them. You can't tell without them making their mating call. So you can tell them apart by their call. The interesting thing here is that the gray tree frog is a regular diploid animal, meaning it's got two sets of chromosomes, as is the standard for vertebrates, where we just got the two copies of those chromosomes. The Copes, on the other hand, somehow wound up with four, and I don't know that it's totally known how or why that would have to, that would happen, but I think part of the thinking is that during the Ice Age, these were split off, and somehow the Copes got wound up with somehow getting four sets of their chromosomes. They don't interbreed. Although they overlap incredibly, heavily in their range. So it's really interesting little species. So if you're out in Manitoba, you're going to have both the gray and the Copes's gray tree frog. Very variable in terms of their looks. They can be smooth with a little bit of markings around their eye, or they can look a fair bit more like bark and be kind of striped and mottled in their appearance. Both species have these kind of yellow legs on the kind of inside of their thighs, and this is really only something you see as the frog is either jumping or in this photo like it happens to be climbing a sheet of glass. So I think that's pretty interesting. They've got these enlarged little toe pads, and that helps them like climb around and suction to things. So this is primarily arboreal species, meaning they spend most of their time up in trees and in vegetations. So you'll find them around wooded ponds, and often they'll be on vegetation. Sometimes you'll be finding them, stuck to the side of your house. The only gray tree frog I've ever seen was on the side of a raspberry leaf on a friend's farm. So both of their calls have a relatively flat pitch. The gray tree frog has more of a whirring call, and you can make out the pulses in the whir. The Cope's gray tree frog has more of a buzz to it. It's more of a fast brr, and you can't make out any of those pulses. And I'm just going to play some of these for you so we can get the hang of them, and I'll overlap them on a second go around. Let's listen to the gray tree frog first. So you can really hear those pulses if you imagine that whir, that you can hear the individual pulses, as opposed to the Copes's gray tree frog, which really has more of a buzzy burr noise. I'm going to overlay the gray tree frog in here, so we'll start to hear both. So more of a burr for the Copes, and the more of a whir grrr for the gray tree frog. if you're not sure, you know, you could just get them down to the Treefrog complex, and that is often all you can do, especially if you just have, a visual on it and you're sure that you're in the small areas where the ranges don't overlap. I've got this little video here because I'll play the difference between the boreal chorus frog, which sounds a little bit similar, and the Copes's gray tree frog. If you're unfamiliar with this, this is what a spectrogram looks like, or a sonogram, and you've got, the time is going to be going along here on the x-axis, frequency on the y, so the sounds that are lower down are lower in pitch, the songs or the markings that are higher up here are higher in pitch, and the brightness, how pink things are, is the loudness. So we're going to be hearing some crickets going along in the background. That's that line there. And we've got the boreal chorus frog, which kind of arcs in pitch a little bit, and the Cope's gray tree frog, which is more flat in pitch. So I'll play that for you. So if you remember, the boreal chorus frog is the one that sounds like you're running your thumbnail over the teeth of a comb, and the Copes's gray tree frog is really doing that little burr, burr noise. I'll play that once more. Okay, there's a short little example for you. Okay, we can go over our little bit of bird ID and sounds today. We've got our blue-winged teal and our green-winged teal. Just got the drakes popping up for you here, but if you're taking a look at where the white is, that blue-winged teal is going to have that lovely great big arc between the eye and the bill, and the green-winged teal is going to have that little spur on its flank, kind of close to the front end of the bird. Got these little soft pip 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 noises for our blue-winged teal. And peep, peep, peep noises for the green-winged teal. Almost reminiscent of that spring peeper. Okay, our horned grebe and our eared grebe. That horned grebe, more of a flat top head, the eared grebe, more of a pointy head. Overall, they're kind of, they're relatively similar looking, that kind of rusty, dark reddish color, and lots of dark blacks and, those similar little yellow parts on their heads, but they do look a fair bit different in their structure of their head, especially at a distance, and as well as those habits. So the horned grebes hang out in pairs on small ponds, and eared grebes are far more gregarious. They like to nest in colonies, and you'll find them in shallow wetlands, but usually on the slightly larger side, not always. Okay, so we got some raspy, whinny braying of the horned grebe. And the eared grebe that does that hoo-wee-chick, hoo-wee-chick. And we also have the Wilson snipe, who does this haunting, winnowy flight display. And they also do this keck, 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 squeaky wheel noise. And our black tern, which sounds like a dog's squeaky toy. And of course, our three frog species are spring peeper, which should be peeping about nowish. And of course, our tree frogs, the gray and the copses gray. There's the gray. And the copse, that more burr noise. I'll overlay the gray here. So those are the two tree frogs. And that's all that's fit to print for this evening. Thank you very much for tuning in. My name is Leanne Latchmore. Of course, you can reach out to me at skatlas@birdscanada.org. You can reach out to Birds Canada on all of the socials and follow us. We are a not-for-profit charitable organization, so if you like this webinar and you want to make a donation, please feel free to do so. I want to give a big thank you to the MarshWatch supporters. We've got the Manitoba Fish and Wildlife Enhancement Fund, the Government of Canada, the Saskatchewan Ministry of Environment's Fish and Wildlife Development Fund, Sask Power, and Wildlife Habitat Canada. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of you. You know, there wouldn't be a series if there wasn't any interest in it. So, you know, I thank all of you for attending and all of your lovely comments and keeping me on track when I, you know, don't have the sound on. I very much appreciate it. So I am going to go ahead and wrap it up here. I will turn off the recording now and we can get to the quiz.